Okay, we're playing a 2300. So let's go e4 this time. And he plays the modern. Now, we already have faced the modern a lot of times. And my favorite system of development is to put this bishop on e3. The point being, we want to keep our center nicely protected. So a6 prepares b5, but there's a complicated... So a4 here is possible. There's basically several ways of playing this. We could play a4 and stop b5, but we're actually going to allow it. And b5 is annoying, but not as annoying as it may appear. Now we're going to go h4. We're going to start attacking the king side. Okay. Now, what is the drawback of the move h5? Like, he stops us from going h5 ourselves. What is the drawback of this move? Who can explain that to me? Now, first of all, we need to play f3 to support this pawn. The drawback is that it weakens g5. And that's exactly what we're going to do here. We're going to go knight h3 and knight g5, sinking our knight into the weak square that he's just created. Okay. Now we need to complete our development, but we need to do it in a very, very careful way. So we're going to actually castle first. We're going to castle long. We're going to see how he sort of develops his pieces. That's going to help us understand where we need to put our bishop. So what's a good follow-up to castling that I've played a couple times? This king on c1 could be improved. What am I referring to specifically? So a move like king b1, and I'll talk about this a little after the game, is a very good follow-up to castling long because the king is just safer there. It's away from the c-file, all of this stuff. Now, what black is preparing here is the move c5. So if we put our bishop on d3, then we obstruct our own control of the file and we help him play c5. And that's not something I necessarily want to do. But there is a really cool idea that we could try to apply. So what should we do here instead? Jal, thank you for the sub. Now, this knight on c3. This knight can be improved. And this is a typical idea in these positions. Where can we lead this knight? So we can go to e2. We can try to go to f4. That has its own dangers. Okay, so he does go c5. He sort of goes c5 automatically. And we can go knight f4. That's very, very thematic and typical maneuver. You should remember it, basically. So he can play cd and e5, but I've anticipated that. I don't think that actually works. We'll see, though. So there's a lot of things to talk about in these positions, but... Okay, so the reason e5, and I actually blundered. So bishop c3 was my idea because he can't take. But what I blundered was the move b4. Now, the good thing is, because I've played this in the way that I have, we can actually sacrifice the piece, and I think we have very legitimate compensation for the piece. Let's see if he finds b4. Well, knight d5, he'll just take on d5, and then he'll take the bishop. Let's see if he finds b4. He doesn't. Okay. So what should we do now? We don't actually have to move this knight, but we will, because the d5 square is extremely weak, so we're going to occupy it with our knight, and then we're going to reoccupy it with our queen. And this opening is absolutely legit. So, ooh, he goes queen d7. Okay. So he leaves the knight here. Now, how should we go about playing this position? What we should do, we should try to find if we can infiltrate what are the weak avenues in his position. One thing I'm seeing, right? I'm seeing that there's this diagonal. So we can put our bishop here. The bishop has done its job on c3. Now it was just biting on granite. Now we're going to improve the position of our bishop. We're going to get the rook out of the picture. Now we have two possibilities. We can give a check on c7. But I think even better, perhaps, is to go knight b6 and then capture the pawn on t6. But the problem with that is that we trade queens, and I feel like we could get more out of this position if that makes sense. But, you know, but it's fine. A pawn is a pawn. Let's not overthink it. I'm just going to take it. Yes, we still have all the superiorities that we had previously. We have our pieces on dominant positions. You can see how passive he is. Okay, he attacks the rook. We need to move it back. And we can circle back to d5 with our knight. We also need to develop the bishops. We need to connect the rooks. He's not actually threatening really to take at all. So we have several ways of playing this. We can go bishop e2. Let's complete our development first. Now this pawn is very weak. I'm noticing this pawn. I'm saying, aha, this pawn is weak. How can we attack this pawn? Again, it's all about flexibility. There's a certain piece that has already done its job on the square that it is on right now. How can we attack this pawn? Find the move. Bishop c3. Repositioning the bishop, attacking the pawn. If he goes knight d7 and defends, there is a tactic. The tactic is to notice that the king is overloaded. Simple overloading tactic. What is the tactic? Knight f7. Yeah. I'm going a little bit faster because this guy's really strong and I don't want to lose on time. And he simply resigns, so he just got disappointed. I mean, actually, the funny thing is, if he goes king e6, and he tries to chase the rook away from d7, what would white do here? A lot to unpack in this game, and I will. What would we do here? Who can find the little tactic? Yeah, so not immediately. A lot of people are thinking this. That's the right thought, because this is the idea, but remember that he can take the rook. And the rooks defend each other, so white's going to be down a piece. But that's the right idea. We need to play this first. Then we take on e5. We're going to win the exchange back, and we're going to be up 3 pawns. And at this level, when you're 3 pawns down, there's absolutely no chance. I mean, that's just an overwhelming advantage. That was a very nice game. Okay. So let's talk about what happened. There's a lot to discuss here. Don't panic. I will guide you through everything that I did. That's the fun part about analyzing afterward. And just be prepared. We're going to take a while on these games because I want to squeeze all the instructive content out of it. It's not about playing the maximum amount of games. I really want you guys to fully appreciate the logic and stuff. So the modern we've faced before several times. I'm not going to talk about the modern in general. I mean, it's literally called the modern, and it's similar to the perk. Now, one of the key differences between the perk and the modern, as you guys probably know, the perk is when you go d6, then knight f6, and then g6. So if you just visually compare, the knight is not on f6 yet. And so black has all of these setups that involve delaying the move knight f6, letting the bishop have this influence over the diagonal without blocking it. That's why a6 is the sort of more modern continuation. This is a theory. This is not senseless. This is the main line. Now, why didn't I play a4? The logic behind this, guys, is actually very simple. Which side am I probably going to castle on, given that I've expressed my desire to attack on the king side? Which side is... Yeah, so we're probably going to castle long. Now, can you guys appreciate that a move like a4 in conjunction with castling long could lead to big problems? For example, if he develops and I develop, and let's just say he goes knight bd7 and castles long, what move now becomes possible for black? Very nasty little move that uses this pawn as a hook to open up a file. Bingo. So b5 is super nasty. If you just myopically... Well, if you take with a knight, you get checkmated. That's how quickly this could backfire. But even if you take with a bishop, I think everybody can appreciate how nasty it is that now black has this going, and he opens up another file, and you know, all of this can collapse super quickly. So the move a4 is a big weakness in conjunction with castling long. This would basically restrict me to castling short, which is fine. That's another setup. But in this game, I wanted to castle long, so we allow this move. Now we go h4, h5, and f3. Now, the benefits of castling long is that it allows you to castle short. It allows you to attack on the other side of the board without worrying about king safety. If you were to castle short and then attack on that side, you would have to be incredibly cautious about pushing your pawns out. You wouldn't be able to do that, if that makes sense. And black basically has to castle this side. I mean, he's gone a6, b5, so, you know, black castling queenside here would be unthinkable. Yeah, castling to c1 and then to g1. Tranquil C, I'll talk about that. That's a fantastic question. Now, the idea of the move f3 is to take the sting out of the move bishop b7. If we didn't do this, if we just developed normally, then the very nasty move would be b4. And this pawn becomes very weak. So f3 is to ensure that the bishop isn't as good on b7. So knight d7. Now we get our knight to g5. That's the weak square created by the move h5. And he plays e6, which is sort of a very typical way of developing. He gets his knight to e7. Knight f6 is also possible, but the problem here is there's e5 ideas that white has in the future. This knight could get caught in the crossfire, so this is totally normal. Now we castle. We go queen e7. So, great question was asked by Tranquil C. What is the difference between a piece biting on granite and having good potential energy? Well, that involves forecasting the future. That's part of, like, the kind of logic that I'm trying to get you guys to have. The bishop, for example, on b7 is biting on granite. That's not a very good bishop. Why doesn't the bishop have potential energy? Because even if this diagonal were to open, even if he were to get this pawn out of e4, there would be this pawn chain that the bishop would be leaning against. And also, nothing particularly important is happening on this diagonal. Like, even if the bishop were completely open, it's not like it would be participating directly in attacking my king. So you want to think about, like, what is likely to happen in the future? How likely is it to happen? And even if it does happen, like, how much does the piece that gets open benefit. And the bishop on b7 is just kind of out of the game permanently. Why didn't I put the bishop on g5 instead of the knight? That's a good question, because the bishop is on e3. It has an important job. It's guarding the d4 square. So if I were to put the bishop on g5, he could strike with c5. This pawn would be softened up, and I'd have to react negatively to this. I'd have to take, and that lets his knight into the game. And then the knight wouldn't have any square to go. Okay. So now king b1. Improving the king. Rook d8. Why didn't I develop my bishop? So as I explained during the game, this loosens the contact between my queen and the pawn. It weakens the pawn. This makes c5 a lot stronger. Now he's threatening c takes d4. And I really don't want to take on c5 here. Because he takes d takes c5, he opens up the file. These pawns can just roll me out of the gym here. Why don't I play d5? Because on a logical level, it opens up his bishop. Right now his bishop is super strong. And he can combine the bishop with these pawns and start a very, very nasty attack on the queen side. c4 and then b4. And you guys should be able to just see how nasty this could become. This is a nasty little attack. And the basic reaction that I want to have to c5 is to ignore it. No, this is fine. This is the correct way to play it. It's just that this line has drawbacks. You know, as I've explained, not in every position are all of your pieces going to be amazing. He's played this, I think, by and large correctly. I think his main mistake is about to happen. So he takes e5 and now bishop c3. This is what I had calculated. Obviously, if he takes the knight, I play bishop takes g7, and his rook is actually trapped. Even if it wasn't, this would be a disaster. But the rook is actually trapped. All three squares are covered. So I'm not sure, Dresurek, what you're asking. Like, you know, I don't think he could have played d takes c3. What if he plays b4? So that was his correct move. I actually missed this. The idea of b4 is to distract the bishop. This is a distraction or a decoy sacrifice. You're getting the bishop off of the long diagonal. If my pawn was on b3, I would go bishop b2, but I can't do that. So I have to take. And what happens here? Bishop takes b4, he takes my knight, so he wins a piece. But what does white do here to get maximal compensation for the piece? Like, what is the best follow-up move? And could somebody explain to me, like, on a logical level, why is this not winning for black? Like, what does white's compensation consist of? I'm going to take a couple bites, sorry. Yeah, so white's compensation is number one, 2 pawns for the piece, and number 2, the initiative. What does that mean? Now, at this level, part of the reason that the game can be hard to follow is because there's a lot of elements to the position, right? You might look at this and say, well, black's up a piece, he's winning. Well, he's not. White's got 2 pawns. White's got a huge initiative, which manifests itself in the fact that black is not developed. Well, there's checkmate. So what we need to do here, in order to conduct the initiative well, is to find ways to defend against the threats with tempo. Tempo is incredibly important. So Mr. Lama, a move like bishop a3 is not bad, but that's actually not the best move. What we need to look for, can we defend against mate while also posing a threat to our opponent? And the move here is queen b4. e5 is interesting, but I'm not sure you have anything after knight takes e5. This gets a little too tactical. The bishop gets caught in the crossfire. I don't think this works. So queen b4 is the best move. This should make sense to everybody. We are attacking the bishop, and we're defending against mate. Like I've said many times, you want to leave the queen for the most important tasks. This is an important task. If the bishop moves, how can we now develop a tempo? We can take the pawn. That's fine. But I don't think that's the best we can do. How can we develop with tempo? Bishop c4 is correct. Now, this is not winning immediately. Black can defend with knight h6. But look how bad black's position is. He's completely frozen. He can't castle. And already a move like e5 has to be considered. Just blasting everything open. And I think checkmate will follow. Checking with a computer here, it's +7. Knight takes c5, rook h e1. And look at how amazing white's position is. So according to the computer, this is already better for white. This is the correct idea. And I'm going to check my accuracy here. So bishop c3, white is much better. b4 is still his best move. And after bishop takes b4, ef, and bishop d6, black has an insane resource that actually complicates the game. Can somebody actually take a stab at what this is? Because any human would automatically move their queen. But black has another idea. And the idea stems from noticing that there is a pin or an x-ray that the rook exerts on the queen. So we can actually move the knight away. The idea is if we take the queen, black takes the queen. White takes the rook, black takes the bishop. If you count up the material, black has 2 pieces for a rook and I think 2 pawns, which is slight material advantage for white. But you've gotten the queens off the board. Black can castle. So if I were white, I would not actually take the queen. I would play queen d4 or something like that, just keeping the tension and maybe pressuring the knight. So this is a very nice resource. Black is still worse. But in the game, he goes knight c5. Allows us to access the d5 square, and then he doesn't take the knight for some reason. Let me, again, charge my headphones. So basically, he should have taken the knight. And the secondary perk of this is, I think, that black can go knight f6 now. And he can develop a tempo. Black is worse. Why is black worse? Who can explain to me verbally what factors compose white's advantage here? If you were to look at this position, how do I know that white's better? Who can lay these out for me? This is actually really important to be able to make the right observations like this, in my opinion. It also gives me a chance to eat. So, control of the center, yep, you guys are all correct. Pardon the speech, but one very important thing that I have not introduced yet. I'm going to unlock a concept that I have not talked about at all in the speedrun. I have waited specifically until approximately 2250. That is the notion of static versus dynamic factors. You're like, oh. Static versus dynamic factors. Is my mic like, is the sound quality bad? I mean, I think I improved the settings, but I did already get a better mic and I will be installing it shortly. It should sound fine, yeah. So, static versus dynamic factors. Now, as the words imply, a static factor is something that is relatively permanent. It's a part of the position that, it's not that it will forever be the case, but it's very, very hard to get rid of. Thanks, Clyde. Welcome. So, for example, one of the static factors in the black's position is the backward pawn. Static just means immovable, or something that's unlikely to be gone in the next couple of moves. Now, yes, one could make the case that black can go d5, but that's kind of unlikely. That's kind of unlikely because that's going to drop the e pawn. So the backward pawn, that's probably going to remain for a long time. Another thing that's a static factor, the bishop. Notice black's bishop. It is literally completely devoid of potential energy. It's biting on granite, my favorite term. Can you guys really see a way that this bishop gets better? Not really, right? I mean, you can go to h6. It could even take the knight, but even that contains its own problems. The bishop is kind of permanently bad here. Now, what's a dynamic factor? A dynamic factor is the fact that white is castled and black is not. Because either black is going to castle in the next couple of moves, or he's not. It's one thing or the other thing, and it's very likely that he will castle. Thank you, Oprakak. So what is a way that... So what you need to do when you're evaluating a position is you need to categorize in some way the static and dynamic factors. And you need to ask yourself, first and foremost, if you can exploit the dynamic factors first, because they tend to evaporate. Like, you don't need to worry yet about attacking d6 with all of your might, because that pawn is likely to remain weak for a long time. And so queen c6 check would be the best way to exploit the dynamic factor, which is the fact that black is not castled yet. And if black plays queen d7, then it's fine to go into an endgame. And because the d6 pawn is a static weakness, who can propose for me a long-term plan to attack this pawn? What sequence of moves would allow white now to pile up on this d6 pawn? And this doesn't have to be that fast. I mean, rook takes d6 here doesn't work, unfortunately, because of the back rank mate. That's another dynamic factor. Yeah, you double rook. So one thing you could do that's really five-head is to go g3. g3 would get the bishop to h3. This would prevent black from doubling rooks, making it harder for him to defend the pawn. d5 would drop this pawn, and so rook d1 follows. And the bishop could come to b4 if the knight moves. Black is going to be in very big trouble here, okay? So that's a way of looking at the position. I'll apply that a little bit more in subsequent games. I know that it might not seem all that important to you guys right now, but I just wanted to introduce this concept slowly. So anyways, that's why black would be worse here, but he doesn't do that. And here we do exploit the dynamic factors, which is the fact that black is uncastled. So his king is weak, so we can basically play near his king. The pawn on d6 is incredibly weak. We win the pawn. We get into an endgame. And this is like incredibly hard to defend for black. I mean, not only is he down a pawn. Whoa! Not only is he down a pawn, but Tommy Fukin Shelby gifting 10 subs in the community. Mine. The best troll in the world. Damn, girl. The best troll in the world. Tommy Fukin Shelby. You are the freaking man. Yeah, bishop b4 would be possible too. You are the freaking man, Tommy. Thank you so much. You're gonna make me cry. This man's gonna make me cry. Can you believe that? This man is gonna make me cry. Okay. Thank you so much. Appreciate it, Tommy. You're the man. You're not gonna see tears today, but maybe soon. Maybe soon. And we got another sub, Trill OG. The OG subbing. So my voice is different. How is my voice different? Is my voice like, I'm actually curious. People have been telling me that I can hear my own voice. So I think I talk differently without headphones. But I wonder like quantitatively what my voice, what the differences are. It's a little softer, yeah. Well, because I hear my own voice, so I'm conscious of it. That's fair. That's fair. More calm. Okay. I'll try to implement that when I have my headphones on. Ooh, Dr. Olano throwing the challenge out. Interesting. Okay. So white is better for two reasons. We're up a pawn, and look at black's position. He's completely undeveloped, and now we pile up on the weak pawn on e5. Part of the reason I saw bishop c3 is what I noticed. Knight f6 makes the move f6 impossible. So f6 would defend the e5 pawn. As soon as he plays knight f6, that gets the alarm bells ringing, because this pawn is now basically defenseless. We know that the best way to defend a pawn is with another pawn. That is impossible. That means this is, by the way, a dynamic factor, because the knight on f6 would eventually be likely to move, and then that would make f6 possible. So we want to exploit this ASAP. So knight takes f7, overloading. If the king takes, then rook takes d7, and he resigned here. As I explained, he's going to lose another pawn, and that's going to be the game. Yeah, so you don't want to go crazy with static versus dynamic, but you want to use those to get a sense of like what the priorities are. Usually the priorities are going to be to exploit the dynamic factors if you can, and you shouldn't necessarily rush with the static factors. That's kind of, the way you should think of that. Well, why do I wear headphones? It's just like what I'm used to, and also I hear the move sounds and stuff. It's kind of weird to not wear headphones for me. Okay. Yeah, there are several books that that talk about this, which are very, very advanced. But basically that's that. Okay. So any questions about the game? Would bishop e4 have been good? Not sure what you're asking. Yeah, I have to hear the move sounds. Totally. No, same here, same here. So king b1 is a general purpose move that's very common when you castle. And I mean, I guess the concrete reason is we can envision a scenario where black gets c5 in, and the king could get easily caught in the crossfire. Like, I'm going to make some random moves here. And we could easily envision a scenario like this, right? Where, okay, now black has this pressure and we accidentally move our knight, we get checkmated. And I can show you guys several examples of a king on c1 actually getting super in very big trouble. And one of the most beautiful applications is, I just remembered a game that I've seen years ago. And let me show you guys that game. I think an engine would play king b1. So the accuracy on this game is probably not very high. But let me see if the engine likes king b1. One sec. Yeah, not great. It was like 80%. But the king b1 was... Yeah, king b1 was good. King b1 was good. King b1 was a good move. Yeah, engines do like a move like king b1. Okay. So let me just show one game before we move on to the next one. If you guys just give me a second. So as you guys can see, and we're going to face this from black's perspective, this is Vaganian against Planets. Vaganian was an Armenian grandmaster, one of the strongest players in Armenia in the 70s and 80s. He's still alive. Albin Planets was from, I think, Yugoslavia. And unfortunately has a very tragic life story. He had suffered from a lot of mental issues, and later in life he kind of went off the deep end. But he was an incredibly strong attacking player. One of those guys that flies under the surface. Most people haven't heard of him, but he played a lot of absolutely brilliant games. And this was one of them. So what we see here is that black is clearly attacking, but white is up a pawn, and this knight is in trouble. And so Planets needs to find a way to get to this king. And he finds in this position one of my favorite combinations, actually. Thank you, Al Kowalski. I'll tell you guys what move this game combination starts with. It's bishop f5, Slovenian, sorry. Slovenian. Now, he sacrifices the rook. And he does that in order to get the queen away from the main area of the board. And now he starts getting to the king with a beautiful idea. So what is the logical follow-up to this? What's the logical follow-up to this? Yeah, queen d6 is correct. You give the frontal check to the king. Now, if the king goes to e2, then this is going to be devastating. The king has to walk to f3. Then you have a simple variation, which results in one of several checkmates. So Vigenyan goes to c1. He's like, all right, big deal. Okay, you gave me a queen d6 check. My king gets even safer. And now, guess what? The reason I'm showing you guys this game, because the king is on c1. What Planets notices, king cannot escape back to d2. So the king really has only one escape path, and that is to b1. So whatever he does, he realizes it has to be a knight move. If he moves his knight away, then the king is sort of boxed in. Where do you move the knight away? Knight a1, yeah. Brilliant move. Knight a1, aiming for b3. This is a checkmate threat. Vigenyan, though, is like, whoa, 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 whoa. My queen is going to have something to say about that. Queen takes b7. And if you give a check on b3, you blunder the knight. And here Planets finds a very, very sexy idea. It's quite simple. Queen c7 check, yeah. Queen c7 check. Queen takes c7, knight b3 checkmate. I always like these mates with a knight and a bishop. I think they're absolutely stunning. And there was nothing that Vigenyan could have done about this. If he didn't get his queen out, the attack would have just been overwhelming. That's a very, very beautiful idea. Knight a1, queen b7, queen c7. Yeah. Mate with two pieces. Vigenyan resigned after queen c7, although it would have been nice to let him deliver that checkmate. Okay, so king on c1, you know, if the king was on b1, it would have a2. I had a similar theme in one of my games, which my opponent could have put on the board and failed to. Yeah, that is going in my Tinder profile, exactly. If you want a shortcut to no matches, just have that be your profile picture. Okay, that's pretty dirty stuff right here. Pretty dirty stuff.